Greetings. My name is Patricia Maria Weinman, and I'm the Associate Coordinator of MIT Radius. It's my pleasure to welcome you here. We have two more programs as part of this seminar series before the end of the semester. We have also archived with video and captions our past programs from the entire semester, so please feel free to visit our website at radius.mit.edu for all of that information. During this program, please feel free to utilize the Q&A function, particularly once the speakers have finished their presentations. I would now like to introduce Subrata Ghoshroy, a longtime colleague and friend of Radius. Subrata is the organizer of this seminar and will act as moderator and introduce our guests today. Subrata is a former U.S. Congressional Science Fellow and member of the professional staff of the U.S. House Armed Services Committee. In addition to his position as a research affiliate in MIT's program in Science, Technology, and Society, he's currently a visiting professor at the Tokyo Institute of Technology. On our website listing of this program, there is a link to a recent page that Subrata had published by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists on Missile Defense. And so you can check that out there. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our guests, and thank you, Subrata.
Thank you very much, Trish. Just think you have to do it 2 more times and that's it. I'm really thankful to the MIT Radius, Trish Weinman, Christina English, Thea Lucas, and now Karen today as the captioner. They have been extremely helpful and instrumental in getting this thing possible, this global webinar. And I must thank also my program, the Science, Technology, and Society program, which has given us some help and support. So today we are very fortunate to have Dr. Jun Tateno. I met Dr. Tateno in 2015 when I visited, or attended rather, a conference on the future of energy in Japan in the light of the Fukushima accident. And this was organized at the National University in Yokohama by the Japan Scientists Association, of which Dr. Tateno is a member for a long time. Dr. Tateno has a very long career in nuclear research with the Institute of Atomic Energy Research in Japan for over 30 years. He worked there as a scientist after graduating from Tokyo University at the Faculty of Engineering in 1959. After his work as a researcher in nuclear engineering and nuclear energy, Dr. Tateno became a professor at the Chuo University near Tokyo, and he was there until 2007. And since then, he has been working as a Secretary General of the Nuclear Energy Related Information Center, which publishes the NERIC news, which is the acronym for the institute's name. And they have done that for 40 years, since 1980. And, as such, Dr. Tateno in this particular position has had the advantage of watching the progress of Japan's nuclear energy program. He has written, of course, many scientific articles over his long career, but he has also written books. Recently, the one that was published in 2000 is called The Decommissioning Era Has Begun. We don't need this nuclear power plant. And another one called Severe Accident Threat in 2012, both in Japanese. Along with Dr. Tateno, we also are fortunate to have my colleague at STS, Dr. Marvin Miller, who is an expert, recognized expert in non-proliferation and nuclear power and nuclear disarmament. Marvin was trained as actually, as I recall, as a particle physicist, theoretical particle physics, and at the University of Rochester. And then he became a professor at Purdue University in Lafayette, Indiana, and then moved to MIT, where he taught in the nuclear energy department for 20 years. Marvin and I are both currently associated with the Science, Technology, and Society program at MIT. And finally, we have my good friend and colleague, Rieko Asato. She is, I also met Rieko the same time I met Dr. Tateno at the Japan Scientists Association meeting that she was interpreting then at the meeting, and very impressive. Her interpreting skills are just unbelievable. And she has helped me in many occasions during my visits to Japan. She's she's with the she's on the national staff actually of the Japan Council Against Atomic and Hydrogen Bombs, also called Gensukyo, and she works on international activities of the Gensukyo's many faceted program. She also works as a professional English-Japanese interpreter, as I said, and she has a BA in English from Osaka University of Foreign Studies. And again, she's a superb interpreter, and I'm so thankful that she's available to help us out. So with that, I think our introductions are over now. Over to you, Dr. Tateno. Beautiful.
Thank you for giving me the chance to speak here today. My name is Jun Tateno. I'm a researcher in the field of nuclear power. Today, I would like to talk about the Fukushima accident, nuclear power accident, and the subsequent nuclear power in Japan. This is Tokyo Electric Power Company's Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Station before the accident. This company is called TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Companies, from Tokyo Electric Power Companies. The contents of my talk are as follows. Number one, overview. Number two, talking back on the Fukushima accident. Number three, current status of Fukushima Daiichi Station. Number four, nuclear power plant restart. Number five, future of the nuclear power in Japan. Overview Fukushima nuclear disaster. On March 11th in 2011, three nuclear power plants at Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Station were hit by a huge earthquake and the accompanying huge tsunami. All cooling equipment was stopped, and the nuclear power plant had a core meltdown. As a result, a large amount of radioactive material such as cesium-139, iodine-131, etc. were released into the environment. When the accident occurred, the government issued an evacuation order for residents in the surrounding area 20 kilometers and in other high dose area. Information on evacuation was extremely poor, and it was especially difficult for the elderly and the sick to evacuate. The number of the mandatory evacuees was more than 140,000, and even after 10 years, Near 30,000 people have not returned. Land recontamination work is ongoing, but there are still areas where it is difficult to return. As a result of the accident, many people have lost the foundation of their lives. This is the current difficult to return area. This is TEPCO's Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. The 20 kilometer, this is 20 kilometer. This is stacked packs of decontamination soil. Many trials were held in pursuit of the responsibility of government and TEPCO. This is a melted and solidified core, reactor core. We call this melted reactor core, this one and this one, called fuel debris in unit 1. Even 10 years after accident, fuel debris has not been taken out due to high radiation. A large amount of contaminated water continued to be generated due to the fuel debris cooling, and this disposal has become a problem. According to TEPCO's roadmap, fuel debris will be removed in decades, but it is not even clear whether it can be taken out or not. In this sense, the Fukushima accident is not over yet. Prior to the accident, 54 light water reactors were in operation in Japan, supplying about 30% of the total electricity. Light water reactor consists of two different types: PWR, boiling water reactor, and PWR, pressurized water reactor. This is a boiling water reactor, PWR. I'll explain. This is a reactor core. This is a reactor core, and excuse me. And this is a reactor pressure vessel, or simply called reactor. This is a containment vessel, and this is suppression chamber. In BWR, reactor core heats water, which turns to steam and drives a steam turbine to generate electricity. The nuclear power plants of Fukushima accident are this BWR. The accident was triggered by the earthquake and the tsunami, but the structural defect of the BWR, which was inferior in its ability to remove heat from the system, was strongly related to the progress of the accident. I do not touch on PWR in my talk. PWRs are not without defects. I think the PWR are more complex systems, so that there are many types of severe accident, and the response are expected to be more diverse. Japanese government ordered to stop operation of all nuclear power plants immediately after the Fukushima accident. The Nuclear Regulation Authority, which was launched after the accident, established a new regulatory requirement in 2020. Based on this requirement, the conformity review is conducted for the nuclear power plants requested by the electric power companies, and the operation of nuclear power plant past this conformity review have been permitted. As a result, 9 nuclear power plants are currently operation, and authority emphasizes that the lesson of Fukushima will be applied in this review. As a lesson learned, to know it, let's look at the result of the conformity review. Before that, let's touch on the Fukushima accident in 2011. Looking back on the Fukushima accident in 2011. At 2:46 p.m. on 11th, a huge earthquake of magnitude 9 occurred. At Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Plant, Unit 1, 2, and 3, which were in operation, automatically shut down due to the shaking of the earthquake. The seismic motion destroyed various things. The transmission line towers sank due to the earthquake, so that the supply of electricity from the outside was cut off. The emergency diesel generators started to begin to supply the electricity, but these internal power supply also lost the functions due to the tsunami arrived at 27 and 35 minutes after the earthquake. In this way, a total power loss in the power station. We call this a station blackout. This station blackout occurred. Even if the reactor shut down, a large amount of heat from the decay of fission product is generated. If not removed, the core temperature will rise, eventually leading to a core meltdown. Due to the loss of all powers, ordinary cooling equipment did not work, and the emergency core cooling system, which does not require power, started to cool the core. However, these devices had stopped one after another. Loss of cooling function immediately after the reactor shutdown is extremely dangerous. Please imagine heating an empty kettle in a kitchen. The water in the kettle turns into steam and blows into the kitchen, and the temperature inside the empty kettle rises continuously. The same phenomenon occurred in nuclear reactors. If not cool, the temperature and the pressure inside the reactor will rise, and the water in the reactor becomes steam and ejected into the containment vessel. This is containment vessel. Into the containment vessel. The water level in this water level dropped. Water level in the reactor dropped, and the core is exposed. or is exposed. Feeling the danger of life in the aftershock of earthquake and darkness, the power plant operators made desperate effort to maintain the cooling function, but no avail. The 3 reactors were catastrophic one after another. The process was as follows. The nuclear power plant is equipped with a containment vessel to prevent radioactivity from being ejected directly into the environment due to damage of reactor. To prevent the radioactivity from being ejected directly outside. Compared to PWR, BWR has an extremely small containment vessel. This was very small in the case of BWR. The volume of BWR containment vessel is about 1/5 that of PWR. The containment vessel may be damaged by high temperature and high pressure steam ejected from the reactor. To prevent this, the BWR is equipped with a suppression chamber. However, during the Fukushima accident, it became clear that suppression chamber could not play its role. When the temperature inside the reactor becomes higher, the steam in the reactor is ejected into the suppression chamber through the safety valve. There is a safety release valve, and the steam ejected into the suppression chamber. While the temperature in the suppression chamber is low, the ejected steam condensed here, so that pressure in the containment vessel does not rise. However, when steam is repeatedly ejected, the temperature of the water in the suppression chamber rises, condition no longer occurs, and the pressure in the containment vessel rises eventually. The containment vessel rises eventually. The pressure in the containment vessel rises eventually, leading to destruction. This happened in the Fukushima accident. To prevent the destruction, the operator had to open the valve of exhausting pipe. This one, exhausting pipe, valve to exhausting pipe. And to intentionally release radioactive gas to the environment. This intentional release is called vent. We call vent release from this. When the temperature rises further and the core temperature is at about 1,200 centigrade or higher, the zirconium in the fuel cladding reacts with water to generate a large amount of hydrogen gas. In this way, the hydrogen accumulated in the reactor building ignited, causing a hydrogen detonation in the unit 1, 3, and 4 building. Unit 4 was not in operation, but recent investigation revealed that when venting was performed at Unit 3, hydrogen gas was leaked through the pipe to Unit 4 building and explode. A large amount of radioactive material was released into the event at each vent and hydrogen explosion. Like this. This is a release of radioactivity. The peak corresponds to each vent and hydrogen explosion, etc. At 1800 centigrade or higher, zirconium and iron melted and core meltdown began. This is the release of radioactivity. This is a picture of hydrogen explosion, photo of hydrogen explosion. Water discharge from a fire engine. Reactor building collapsed by hydrogen explosion. The distribution of radioactivity on the ground is determined by the direction of the wind. The current status of Fukushima Daiichi Power Station. Can fuel debris be taken out? There are two serious difficulties on the site of Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Station at present. One is fuel debris that is difficult to remove, and the other is generation of contaminated water. Can fuel debris be taken out? During the accident, the meltdown core pierced the bottom of the reactor and flowed down. As a result, some of debris is at the bottom of the reactor, here, and some is at the bottom of the containment vessel. This bottom of containment vessel. Fuel debris. This is photo of fuel debris. Fuel debris consist of uranium dioxide, zirconium oxide, iron, and the like. Debris emits a strong radiation. Dose rate near the debris is about 10 sievert per hour, and this dose rate is the intensity of death after short-term exposure when the removal work is performed. Therefore, all work needs to be performed by remote control. TEPCO plans to develop the technology and proceed with removal of fuel debris over the next few decades, but it is unclear whether it can be really taken out. Next is number 2 is management of contaminated water. Since the fuel debris generated heat, water is circulated to cool it in the reactor building of Unit 1, 2, and 3. This is a figure of contaminated water. Then circulated water. Then component of debris dissolved into the water, and the large amount of contaminated water is generated. On the other hand, a large amount of groundwater also is flowing into the reactor building. The circulating water is mixed with this groundwater. Circulating water and groundwater is mixed here. If nothing is done, it will lead to large-scale groundwater pollution. So a partition wall, this one. Partition wall in the ground have created around the building to limit the inflow of groundwater. And a part of inflowed groundwater is pumped up and purified by multinuclide removal equipment. This one, multinuclide removal equipment, we call ALPS. Since tritiated water, it's a water containing tritium. Since tritiated water cannot be removed by these ALPS, the treated water is stored in tank on the site. A large number of tanks containing such treated water have been constructed over the entire site. Like this. These are the tank of treated water. These are the tanks. Contaminated water tanks that cover the entire Fukushima Daiichi site. It is being considered to dilute titrated water and release it into the ocean. But due to the problem of reputational damage, local fishermen and other residents strongly oppose the release. So may I take a short brief?
Yes, absolutely. Are there any questions, like any clarification, anything, Trish, on the Q&A box?
Not right now.
Okay. Then we will, after break, we will continue with Dr. Tateno for... Marvin, did you have any comments when Dr. Tateno is taking a break?
Marvin, you might be muted.
Oh, okay. I think Dr. Tateno is back.
It's all right to start.
Are you okay to go forward?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
So I will continue. Nuclear power plant restart in Japan. Japanese regulatory system before Fukushima. Before the Fukushima accident, there was criticism that regulation system in Japan was not fully functioning because regulation and promotion belong to the same government agency, and the independence of regulation was lost, and the regulatory authority and the regulated side were cohesive. Especially after the accident, it was strongly pointed out that the latest knowledge related to natural disaster, such as earthquake and tsunami, was not applied, and that severe accident countermeasures were not required. Introduction new regulatory system. After Fukushima, in 2012, the government established the Nuclear Regulation Authority. The authority established a new regulatory requirements in 2013 and has begun a conformity review of nuclear power plants based on the new requirements. The current status of the nuclear power plant operation in Japan. As a result of the review, at present, 16 units passed the review, 11 units were under review, 8 units did not apply, 23 units were decommissioned. This is a picture from Regulation Authority. Outline of the new regulatory requirements. Regulation Authority cited the following point as a characteristic of conformity review. Number one, incorporating severe accident. This is severe accident measure, severe accident management. Geez. Emphasis on natural disasters such as earthquake and tsunami. Number three, emphasis on internal fire, flooding, etc. Number four, diversifying safety facility, including a heavy use of mobile safety facility, such as power supply vehicle or so. And number five, specifically requiring for anti-terrorism measures, anti-terrorism. Opinion polls. At the time the regulation authority was established showed that the more than 60% of population opposed the restart. However, the regulation authority took it for granted that experts would make decisions regarding to the use of nuclear power plant and conducted a conformity review. The government proceeded with the restart based on this review. Here, I'll focus especially on the reactor engineering issue on the conformity review and their problem. Number one, dangerous event that expose the resident to radioactivity, that expose resident to radioactivity. The regulation authority has allowed the BWR to operate, subject to venting and the installation of alternative circulation cooling system. This is a vent line. already mentioned, vent is intentional release of radioactivity. There are two types of vent. Filter vent. It's a filter vent, which reduced radioactivity to about 1,000th through the filter. And another is a hardened vent, which release directly without passing through a filter. In the conformity review, the electric company said, we will not use the hardened vent when the core damaged. If not, why leave the hardened vent system? The filter may be clogged in the event of an accident. In such a case, a large amount of Fukushima accident grade radioactivity may be released to the environment through the whole of the this hardened vent, hardened vent. It is a design defect of BWR that the accident cannot be ended without venting. Taking Fukushima accident as a lesson, BWR should not be allowed operation. The second, alternative circulation cooling system, complementary system for defect design. As mentioned above, BWR provided with suppression chamber for a purpose of preventing the pressure inside the containment vessel from rising excessively. However, the Fukushima accident, heat was not successfully removed from the suppression chamber, and the suppression chamber did not play that role. Suppression chamber. This is suppression chamber. This is serious design defect in BWR. In the conformity review, in order to make up for this defect, the operation of BWR was permitted on the condition that a new cooling system called to make a new cooling system called alternative circulation cooling system was installed. About 99.9% of severe accidents in BWR are assessed as failure to remove the decay heat. This indicates that the BWR design policy, which makes the containment vessel extremely small. This vessel is very small in BWR comparing with PWR. Is essentially wrong. I consider the regulation authority's attitude to allow the restart by simply installing an alternative circulation cooling system and by overlooking this design error to be inappropriate. Can hydrogen explosion be prevented? Zirconium in the fuel cladding react with water to generate hydrogen at high temperature. If you look at the Fukushima accident, you can see how terrible the phenomenon of hydrogen detonation that occurs when hydrogen and oxygen are mixed in a certain ratio. In Fukushima, hydrogen leaks accumulated in the reactor buildings and the explosion occurred. In the conformity review, the inspection was passed on the condition that hydrogen was, In the conformity review, the inspection was passed on the condition that hydrogen recombiners are added for the purpose of removing hydrogen. However, this device was originally provided to remove a relatively small amount of hydrogen generated by radiolysis of water. It is extremely doubtful whether the large amount of hydrogen generated by zirconium water reaction can be removed by adding such a recombiners. Number 3, mobile facility effective. The regulation authority stated that one of the characteristics of the conformity review is heavy use of mobile safety facility. This means that if a large number of water injection vehicle, power supply vehicle, and so on are arranged and used freely, destruction due to an earthquake can be covered. But is it really safe? According to TEPCO's survey after Fukushima accident, the water injected into the reactor cooling system from the fire engine had almost flowed out from the branch pipe on the way, so it didn't reach the core. Temporary mobile facility may look very flexible. However, the reliability is extremely poor. Finally, we talk about future of nuclear power in Japan. Big business such as TEPCO and Toshiba almost went bankrupt in the Fukushima accident. Industry understands that nuclear propulsion is a major risk. Number 2, some companies were temporarily negotiating with Vietnam considering the export of nuclear power, but the plan ended in failure because Vietnam abandoned nuclear power development. Number 3, Japan has few geologically stable grounds, and then geological disposal of high-level water is extremely difficult in Japan. Number 4, in the opinion poll, there are always more than 60% of opinion against the restarting. Considering these factors, it is clear that Japan's nuclear power development is facing a great difficulties. For this reason, there will be no expansion of nuclear power plant in future. The use of nuclear power is likely disappear naturally in Japan. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Tateno. That's a great presentation with a lot of information, and of course your conclusion about nuclear power disappearing in Japan is logical. And I had asked that question to Professor Narabashi at Tokyo Tech, and he was thinking that the restart will accelerate. But it was interesting from your data that a large number of plants have been decommissioned already.
すでにもうたくさんの
Yes, yes.
原子炉がもう廃炉になっているということですか、これ。先ほどおっしゃったように。
そうです。
奈良林さんのお話だと、これから再稼働されるものが増えるというふうに私は聞いていましたが。
増えると思います。増える。じゃあ、ちょっと待ってください。This one. これはもう廃炉に決まったんですね。特に初期の原子炉なんかはもうコンフォーミティレビューもやらないでもう廃炉にするというふうに決めてます。なんていうか
Many of the reactors which were built in the very early period didn't even ask for the conformity review. So they were decided to be decommissioned.
Okay.
Large number of them, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Rieko. Are there any questions at this time, Trish?
I believe
あ出ていま
Rieko
すね。
has been monitoring those
Oh.
and
舘
putting
野さん宛ての質問が出ていまして、質問の訳を私今チャットのところに入れたので、ちょっと見ていただけますか？チャットボタンを押していただくと、下にある
どこですか？
Q&A の右にチャットっていうボタンがあります。
Q&A の右にチャット。
はい。
Q&A はありますけど、チャットっていうのはここにないな。ビデオの停止。
この下にある帯のところですけど、参加者 Q&A チャットというふうにボタンが並んでいませんか？
参加者 Q&A。
はい。
新しい共有っていうのがありますね。
チャットっていうボタンがないですか？
チャットってボタン、ここにないな。
He cannot find the chat button, so I just read out.
that's good, Rieko.
一つ目の質問ですけれども、
はい。
汚染水タンクのスライドの前に映されたトリチウムの汚染水についてのスライドをもう一度見せてもらえますかというのがあります。
はい。
So he will show the slide about the tritium water that was shown before the tank slide.
これですね。
こ
Treated water。
れですね。Yes,
はい。
so I think this is the slide that was asked for.
Yes, she said, Martha said, thank you.
はい、
Yes.
ありがとうございます。それで結構です
Okay.
ということです。
So
はい。で、2
after
つ目の
this, we will move to Marvin Miller.
Actually, there is another question.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Okay,
one more
after that.
question.
Then.
はい。
Yes.
で、
Please.
2つ目の質問ですけども、バックアップとして、メカニカルなクーリングウォーターシステムというのが、備えたような原子炉がなぜ設計されなかったのでしょうかと。つまり、電源がすべて失われても、蒸気の圧力でターボポンプを動かして原子炉容器に冷却水が流れ続けるようなシステム。こういうのがなぜ設計されなかったのでしょうかというのが2つ目の質問です。
はい。それはくっついてたんです。エマージェンシーコアクーリングシステム ECCS っていうのがくっついてたんですけれども、それもだんだんいろんな理由で止まっていってしまったということです。
Actually, there was the emergency core cooling system attached to this reactor. However, it started to move, but it eventually stopped as the accident progressed.
Okay, thank you. Marvin.
はい。では、マービンさんにコメントをお願いします。
Okay. Do I have the floor?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Again, I'd like to thank my colleague Subrata for asking me to participate in this very interesting discussion. And I learned a lot from listening to the lecture by Dr. Tateno. So what I'd like to do is go back a little in time. I don't have much time to talk, but I would like to say that I was 8 years old when the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And after a few days after the Nagasaki bomb, the Japanese surrendered, and there was great joy in the United States at the surrender of Japan after a very long war. And I recall that when I went back to school in September, we sang a song in praise of the atomic bomb.
Mm.
So the atomic bomb, which killed so many people in Japan, and before that, of course, there was major raids which killed many people in Tokyo and other cities. It was greeted in the US with great, great joy. However, the threat, I still think about that because I think that the threat that the use of nuclear power will somehow facilitate the acquisition of nuclear weapons is still with us and has to be considered. So I'm just going to start by saying that there are three major concerns associated with the production of electricity on a large scale using nuclear reactors. One is, which has just been described, is the possibility of a large release of radioactivity because of a reactor accident like a meltdown. The second major concern is disposal of radioactive waste, either high-level waste after reprocessing the spent fuel or directly the spent fuel. And the third thing which I want to concentrate in is, again, the possibility that nuclear power somehow will facilitate, the use of nuclear power will facilitate the acquisition of nuclear weapons. And my first comment here, and on that, I will concentrate on that last thing, is that in 1946, there was a group put together which investigated the problem of the possible misuse of peaceful nuclear facilities owned by countries and only inspected by an international agency, could not prevent the misuse of these so-called peaceful facilities to make nuclear weapons. That was the main conclusion of the so-called Atchison-Lilienthal report, which was mainly written by J. Robert Oppenheimer and published in 1946. And of course, the situation which they thought was inadequate is what we have today. We have an international agency, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which sends inspectors to plants in countries, but the plants themselves are owned and operated by the national facilities. So the difficulty of preventing misuse of so-called peaceful nuclear facilities was very well recognized already in 1946. Now, let me jump from that to 1944. In 1944, of course, the US was in the middle of a vast program to produce nuclear weapons by producing so-called highly enriched uranium or plutonium. And in 1942, it was demonstrated by the great Italian physicist Enrico Fermi that it was possible to maintain a nuclear reactor using natural uranium and so-called moderated by graphite. That was in March 42. And by 44, Fermi's concept had been enlarged so that we had major reactors to produce plutonium for nuclear weapons operated in the state of Washington at a place called Hanford. So that was done already, and there were many very famous physicists still at the University of Chicago. I mentioned Fermi. There was his colleague Eugene Wigner, another man called Leo Szilard, all of whom I've read about but never met. But there was another younger man named, I'm trying to think of his name now. I can't think of it right at the moment. Alvin Weinberg. Alvin Weinberg was a young man who participated in these discussions. And what people were concentrating on, of course, they recognized that electricity could be produced in reactors. You could use nuclear power to propel vessels like submarines, etc. So they looked at all these reactor concepts, and the conclusion that they came to was that uranium was a scarce resource. And therefore, if you tried to generate a lot of electricity using nuclear, but using so-called light water reactors, which is mostly what is used today worldwide, those reactors use about 150 tons of natural uranium per year to produce a so-called gigawatt of electricity. But 150, if you take that as a number, 150, and try to generate a lot of nuclear power around the world, I'll come to Japan in a second, you find that you can't sustain a lot of electricity around the world based on scarce resources of uranium. But it's now known that uranium is much more plentiful than the people in the 40s realized, even not including removing uranium from seawater, which is very dilute but can be done. So one of the main conclusions that these people reached is that if we're going to have a lot of nuclear power, we cannot use so-called light water reactors. We have to use so-called breeder reactors, where the plutonium in the spent fuel of the light water reactors is used to start up reactors which can produce more plutonium than used. And that's why they're called breeder reactors. And so the concept back then, which is still in a way with us, is that nuclear power cannot be sustained for many years except by using breeder reactors. Now, as I said, we don't need breeder reactors because there's much more uranium than originally thought. And so that sort of goes out the window. And the other thing is that although, now I'm talking about Japan, which doesn't have fossil fuel resources, so the Japanese invested very heavily in this fuel cycle, starting with light water reactors and moving to breeders. But it's now recognized, as I said, that you can sustain a large nuclear capacity in Japan as well as other countries just by using light water reactors. Now, the other thing, and the Japanese moved ahead, and in order to get the plutonium and put it into the breeders, you have to have large plants which separate plutonium from spent fuel. These are called reprocessing plants. And they've proved to be very, very expensive to build and operate. And also, coming back to Atchison and Lilienthal, you cannot guarantee that the plutonium removed from these plants will not be diverted to use in weapons, because the diversion is within the measurement error of what the plutonium is. And the final comment I would make, and I come back to Dr. Takami's basic conclusion, I don't think nuclear power has a future in Japan, But the last issue that was raised by the proponents of nuclear power in Japan was even if this plutonium was diverted to make nuclear weapons, you couldn't really make good nuclear weapons from the plutonium produced in light water reactors, which is called reactor grade plutonium. Most of the plutonium weapons around the world is made in so-called small plutonium production reactors where the spent fuel is only in there, the fuel is only in there for a few months, where in a light water reactor it might be in there for a few years. So the contention of the Japanese proponents of nuclear was the so-called reactor-grade plutonium could not be used in nuclear weapons. And this concept has also now been disproven, and experts around the world recognize that nuclear weapons of all levels of sophistication can be made with so-called reactor-grade plutonium. So my basic conclusion is taking into account, forgetting in a way, accidents and disposal of waste, which of course cannot be forgotten, the plutonium risk of using breeder reactors is still with us and must be considered. So I'll stop there.
Was great, little history lesson as well as your thoughts about the Japanese breeder program. Rieko, would Dr. Tateno want to comment on anything Marvin said?
立野さん、今、マルビンさんがおっしゃったこと、かなり長かったんですけど、お分かりになりましたでしょうか。それについてのコメントはと言われてるんですけれども。
I would like to add one final thing. I really learned a lot from Dr. Tony's talk about the accident. For myself, my main resource about learning about the accident was a book published in 2012 by an organization in the US called the Union of Concerned Scientists. It's called Fukushima, the Story of a Nuclear Disaster. And I highly recommend this book to people who want to know in detail about the nature of what happened.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if Dr. Tateno met Ed Lyman or from UCS.
すいません。じゃあちょっと話の内容に対応するかどうかは別で、ちょっと今日本の核燃料サイクルの話をちょっとだけしたいと思います。
はい。Actually, Dr. Tateno is not sure if he actually grasped all the comments that Marvin just made, but I want to make some comment about the nuclear fuel cycle situation in Japan.
Oh, great.
一つは、再処理工場がもうすぐ稼働するというふうに言われてるんですけども、これはもう長い間もうすぐ動くと言われてて、故障を起こしてて、なかなか稼働しないと。で非常に再処理工場の技術っていうのは難しくって、私はもう結局放棄せざるを得ないんじゃないかというふうに思ってます。で
Actually, there has been the work to start the reprocessing plant in Japan, and this has been repeatedly postponed so many times, and with one problem after another. Actually, the technology of the reprocessing plant is so difficult and complicated, and I believe that in the end, Japan will give up on this.
Yes, I agree.
どうぞ続きを言ってください。
And by the way, the Japanese exported their spent fuel problem, what to do with spent fuel, since the reprocessing plant has been continually delayed, by shipping their spent fuel to France, which has a large reprocessing plant on the Normandy coast.
うまくいかないので、この使用済み燃料をフランスに送って再処理してもらうというようなこともやっていましたね。
そうです。はい。その続きを言いますと、
Let me continue.
再処理工場の目的は、プルトニウムを取り出して、それを高速増殖炉で燃やすというのが再処理工場の目的なわけですけれども、
The original purpose of the reprocessing plant is to treat it treat and extract the plutonium to be used in the breeder reactor.
Right.
で、高速増殖炉の日本の高速増殖炉の技術も非常に難しくて、日本の高速増殖炉も、事故を起こしてまま止まっていたんですけれども、新しい規制委員会はもう早々にこの高速増殖炉のストップを命令して、これは今リコミッションの廃炉になることになっています。
And of course, as you know, the technology of the fast breeder reactor is so complicated, and the building and the start of this operation in Japan has been delayed and postponed many times, causing a lot of accidents. So in the end, the Nuclear Regulation Authority set up after the Fukushima disaster ordered the decommission of the fast breeder reactor project.
ですから高速増殖炉がない状態で再処理工場を動かすというのは核燃料サイクルの上から言っても大きな矛盾になるわけで、これをどうするかっていうのは今後の最大の問題になると思います。
So while abandoning the fast breeder reactor project, how can Japan continue with the reprocessing plant project? It's a very big contradiction, and that will be a big issue in the near future.
I would just like to add that now the realization around the world is that although Japan in particular doesn't have much fossil fuel, there's a possibility of using so-called intermittent solar sources, photovoltaics and wind, along with battery storage, which has to be improved. But the combination of the intermittent sources, which can store electricity till when it's needed and the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, is now recognized in the US and other countries as a very valid way of doing away with both fossil fuel and nuclear.
Yeah,
but
right.
this is not universally accepted, of course, because there are countries around the world who still are relying to a great extent on nuclear power. But I don't think nuclear power has a good future.
Thank you.
ちょっと
すみません、世界の人たちが今自覚しているのはもちろん日本は化石燃料がないから原発に頼ってきたわけですけども、しかし風力や蓄電池の技術の開発などでこの必要な時まで電力を蓄えるというやり方の方が有効なんではないかということを人々は気がつき始めています。しかしこの考え方はもちろんまだ原発にかなり依存している国があるので大いに受け入れられているというわけではないわけです。しかしどっちにしても原子力発電には未来がないと私は思っています。
その通りだというふうに思います。
I fully agree with you.
Thank you. If there are any questions, we'll take them now.
他に質問がありますか？
There are no other questions at this time.
今の
Thank
と
you.
ころは質問は出ていないようですね。
Okay. I had maybe I'll raise this issue regarding the Fukushima cleanup. That
福島のこの汚染除去について私の方から円谷さんが言ってます。私の方からちょっと問題点を指摘したいんですが。
that what is, Dr. Tateno, your opinion about the resettlement of people in the former exclusion zone? And because I had visited those towns right after the JSA conference with Kitamura-san and others, that we went out and saw, and it was really something else. But there have been, as you say, 140,000 people are evacuated, and about 30,000 have not returned. Does it mean 110,000 have, or a lot of people are just permanently not coming back?
舘野さんにお伺いしたいんですけども、人々のこの元の住んでいたところへの帰還という問題についてですけれども、科学者会議のシンポジウムの直後に北村さんの案内で私は被災地を訪れたことがあるんで、大変だった状況はわかるんですけども、先ほどのお話では14万人の人たちが強制的に避難を命じられたけで、3万人の人たちはまだ戻れていないとおっしゃいましたが、ということは11万人の人たちは元のところに戻ったということになりますか？
一応そういうふうに考えられると思います。今はもう非常にたくさんの住宅が、高層住宅なんかもですね、建ってまして、そういうところで、多くの人たちが戻ってると思います。ただその人たちが本当に昔の生活を取り戻すことができたかどうかということは多分そうじゃないというふうに思いますけれども、一応11万の人たちは何らかの格好で戻ってるんじゃないかと思います。
So if we look at these numbers, we can say that 110,000 people went back to the places where the exclusion order was lifted. And a lot of houses have been constructed, including the high-rising apartments, and many people were returned there. But it is very doubtful whether these people could really retrieve their past life, the life that they used to lead there. It's really doubtful.
ただですね、さっきも図で示しましたけども、帰還困難区域というのがあって、そこは帰還が難しいわけですね。で、そういうところは本当に将来とも完全に住めるようになるかというと、これは疑問で、多分住めない地域というのは残るんじゃないかというふうに思います。
But I show you in one of the slides where a certain area still designated as the difficult to return areas.
Oh, yes.
And it is very unlikely that anyone would be able to live on even in the future.
Wow.
このピンクのエリアですよね。
そうですね。
Yes, the pink area.
Pink area, yes. Okay. Yep. Yeah, I was there in Tomioka and Namie, both towns.
富岡と浪江には行きましたね。はい。
One other question, Dr. Tateno, for the future of the Japanese
一つの
program.
質問ですけど、日本のこの将来の原発の将来についてですが。
I mean, even though it is going to eventually, most likely, no new nuclear plants will be built in Japan, so the old ones will be retired gradually. But in the meantime, there are 9 operating now, and as your data showed that several of the BWRs are going to be brought online without any major change in the safety cooling system. I had heard that there was going to be some kind of a cooling system that will employ gravity feed that doesn't need any electric pumps.
で、これから新規の原子力発電の建設はないということで、そして古いものは廃炉に向かうということで、というふうにさっきお話になりましたけれども、しかし9つ再稼働がされているということもあり、そしてまた軽水炉の中でこれから再稼働に向かうものもあるというお話でした。で、これから再稼働されるものが実際にこの安全な冷却システムを付け加えるということがなく、 これが再稼働されるということになると危険ではないかと思うんですが。
冷却システムを新しく付け加えるという条件で再稼働が許されているわけですね。それから今後どうなるかっていうのは結局電力会社とかメーカーが原子力を続けることが、本当に利益になるかどうかということで判断されるんだと思うんですけれども、ちょっと待ってください。判断されると思うんですけれども。
And of course, those BWRs which were allowed to restart were allowed on the condition that they would add the new cooling systems.
I see.
Yes, but whether the nuclear power generation would continue or not depends largely by the decision of the judgment by the power companies and also the reactor producers, whether it is feasible or whether it is profitable for them to continue.
それでですね、この、アンナアプライド申請をしてないのが8件あるわけですね。これはどうして電力会社が申請してないのかわからないんですけれども、多分メリットがないと思って申請してないんだと思うんです。そういうふうに電力会社も必ずしも再稼働に全面的に前向きだというわけではないんじゃないかというふうに思います。
So in this table it says on the third line unapplied for the conformity review. So 8 reactors, 8 power plants which did not apply for the conformity review, but just go to the naturally decommissioned. The reason for the unapplication was not fully explained, but it is the judgment of the power company. And so as you can see, the power companies are not necessarily really fully ready to restart all the power plant they have.
Thank you.
そういうことだと思います。
Oh, sorry, Dr. Tateno.
Yes, that's one of the reasons why there is no future.
Okay, I would give both Dr. Tateno and Marvin, if there is a last word, and each of you would want to say anything, and then we are approaching the close of the seminar.
セミナーの終わりの時間に近づいてきたんですけど、最後に結びの言葉ということで、舘野さんとマービーさんに一言ずつお願いしたいんですけれども、舘野さんが先ですかね。
日本のこの福島事故っていうのは世界中の原発を動かしている国々に参考になると思うんですね。でこれを参考にして、そのポリシーを決めていただきたいと思いますけども、私の考えではやっぱり、この原子力というのは今の技術レベルでは十分に安全とは言えないんじゃないかというふうに考えています。
So the Fukushima accident of Japan impacted the whole world, and we hope that the policy decision in any other countries should refer fully to the accident happened in Fukushima, whether they should in their future energy policies. And in my opinion, at the current technology level, nuclear power plant is not safe, and it shouldn't be continued.
Yeah.
I would just like to add a comment, since I'm talking about nuclear weapons mostly. 9 countries in the world currently have nuclear weapons. 8 of those are declared, and 1, Israel, is not declared, but certainly has a very large nuclear arsenal. And there are concerns, particularly now in the Middle East, that additional countries may use the acquisition of nuclear power plants to aid in obtaining nuclear weapons. So I think this whole question of the continued use of nuclear power is very tied up with the whole notion of the danger that not only of accidents at nuclear power plants, but that these countries in the Middle East will Iran already has nuclear power, will somehow use that as a cover to acquire nuclear weapons. So I think the danger of further use of nuclear power, unless it's very, very strictly controlled, and of course we have to take into account there the possibility of nuclear accidents, is a very dangerous issue. And unfortunately, the current US administration has not provided any leadership in this direction.
Yeah, completely agreed. Yeah.
今
Thank
の
you.
私は核兵器の問題について先ほどお話ししたんですけども、今9カ国保有国があって、1カ国はそれを認めてはいないんですけども、大きな懸念って言えるのは、中東で他にもこの原子力発電の技術を入手することによって、実は核兵器に使おうとしているところがあるということです。ですので、この原子力発電を続けるということは、その事故の危険性だけではなく、核兵器を開発するという道につながる危険があるということがあると思うんです。原子力発電を隠れみのにして核兵器を作ろうとしている国があったということです。ですので、非常に厳しくこれを規制しなければ、核兵器を作るということは必ず起こり得ることで、しかしアメリカはこの点について全くリーダーシップを取っていないということを言いたいと思います。
I want to take this opportunity to thank again Dr. Tateno. He has put in a lot of work in.
舘野さん、本当にたくさんの準備をいただいて、お話しいただいたことに感謝いたします。
And,
You are welcome.
Thank you.
and he had to get up early, and also Marvin, and then also my friend Rieko for also getting up in the morning and helping us out. So you lived up to the expectations of the superb interpreter of technical of content that have technical jargon. So thank you all very much. Trish will probably say about that, but we will have your video, the video of this session and the slides on our website, so many more people can watch it at their
このセッ
convenience.
ションはビデオに
Yes, that will
後で
go
見ら
up
れる
on
よう
the
にしてます
website
ので、
within 48 hours.
Within 48 hours.
Thank you.
48
Thank
時間
you
のうちにアップ
all.
します。
Thank you.
あ
We're
りが
very
とうございまし
grateful.
た。
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
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 バイ
ありがとうございまし
バイ。
た。
Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.